We're going to start talking about fasting tonight. Aren't y'all excited about that? Probably something that everybody here participates in on a regular basis, right? Amen. Appreciate y'all. What a blessing. I was actually very interested to find out through studying for the last week or so, just kind of getting my head wrapped around the topic that John Wesley would not ordain anyone into the ministry that did not fast. I think it was every Monday and Wednesday, or every Tuesday and Thursday, twice a week, all day long. If they didn't fast religiously those 2 days in the week, he wouldn't ordain them to be a preacher. And I thought, my goodness, we've drifted far away from those kinds of standards inside of somebody's life. Now there's no temperance at all exhibited in most preachers' life, and which is evidenced in the pew, because if the leader's not leading, then the followers aren't going to follow correctly. And Jesus said it a little bit better than that: if the blind lead the blind, they both fall in the ditch, right? And so I just thought that was amazing to kind of help just set our perspective right. I think we get into this rut. Those of us that are real good Christians, we come to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, and we read some devotional stuff throughout the week. And I mean, we're better than a lot of folks because they don't even come, right? And so we're looking kind of our attaboy sticker to put on our badge and things of that nature. And when you take a biblical synopsis of what it really looks like to be a devoted believer according to New Testament standards, it would probably shock a lot of us. Very, very surprisingly, to see how far away from the pattern of New Testament Christianity we have drifted. A lot of things that are kind of left by the wayside. You know, I feel like, even as a preacher, I feel like I preach so often on what I call the fundamentals. I find myself constantly mentioning, church attendance, Bible reading, prayer, giving, soul winning, church attendance, Bible study, prayer, giving and witnessing, and I get in that rut. That's just that's all I talk about, and really one of the big reasons why I talk about it is because those are some of the easier things that we can judge inside of a person's life. But there are so many other Christian disciplines, Christian exercises that you and I ought to routinely involve ourselves in, and fasting is one such discipline that is given to us for the purpose of godliness. These aren't exercises that are an end of themselves, but they help propel us along and draw us into a closer relationship with God. And so as we kind of examine where we're at this evening, kind of getting started this evening, if you just stop and think maybe perhaps you're a little bit further away from God than you have been at times inside of your Christian experience, or maybe you just say, it's just obvious that I should be a little bit closer than where I'm at, then a great starting place inside of that kind of interrogation process that you should put yourself through would ask yourself about disciplines just like this, and how foreign are they to our routine practice. And so very, very excited to bring this to our attention tonight. Brother Mason is going to be filling the pulpit next Wednesday night. We'll be back home, but I asked him to preach just before Christmas, and so he'll be preaching next Wednesday night. And so it'll be a couple of weeks before we come back, but I'm assuming right now that this take us 2 or 3 Wednesday nights to kind of work our way through the discipline of fasting. Matthew chapter 17, we're not going to read an entire text this evening, just zero in on one verse tonight. You know the text well. Just preached from this, I guess, a handful of months ago from this text. Of course, you've got the transfiguration that's going on top of the mountain, and then this man has brought his child to the remaining disciples so that they would cast out the demon from his child, and they have tried, and the Bible says that they could not. And so Jesus comes back down the mountain, and this father comes to Jesus, and he says, Lord, I brought my son to your disciples. He's a lunatic, he's sore vexed, and asked them to cure him, and they could not. And so, you know the story. Jesus rebukes the demon, rebukes the devil, and he's cast out of him. Verse number 18, Verse 19, the disciples come to Jesus and they question, why couldn't we do this? And Jesus begins giving an explanation in verse number 20, because of your unbelief. But then where I want to focus our attention at tonight, verse number 21, just kind of a launching pad for us tonight, Jesus says, howbeit this kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting. Jesus says this kind, specifically this, he's saying this kind of a devil, this kind of a demon does not get cast out, is not removed without the two practices of prayer and fasting. Fasting is probably the most misunderstood spiritual discipline of all spiritual disciplines, which in my mind becomes very surprising because of the attention that is given to this subject throughout the Scriptures. Fasting is actually mentioned 77 times inside the Bible, which is pretty impressive when you consider that baptism is only mentioned some 75 times. So 2 times more than the subject of baptism. But we probably are a little bit more familiar with baptism and what it stands for than we are with the concept of fasting. And I would dare say tonight that fasting is such a misunderstood discipline because of all the spiritual disciplines. It is probably the least desirable of those disciplines. In fact, I would go as far as to say tonight that it would be easier for a man to give away some of his money than for him to go an entire day without eating. And it may make him feel like he's at least accomplished something, because after fasting, the temptation throughout a 24-hour period is to think at the end of that 24-hour period that I've accomplished making myself hungrier than I was when I first woke up this morning. Whereas when a person puts a $20 bill or a $100 bill or whatever the case is into a blue offering bucket, whenever they do that, at least there's some kind of a sense of accomplishment. It's easier, which is, again, saying a lot, especially for a Baptist congregation, for me to dare say that, right? That it's easier for us to give money than it is to go without food for a day. As believers in the 21st century arena, we live in a gluttonous, self-denial-less, self-indulgent society. Wouldn't you say amen to that? We live in a dog-eat-dog world, a society where we want everything right now more than we want at any other time in our life. We don't want to wait. We don't want to work. We don't want to labor. We want everything, and we want it most of all right now. And that's really the idea as it comes to the subject of fasting. We eat not so much because we're hungry, but because we're programmed to eat. And the moment in time, it's amazing. And maybe some of you could bear witness with my own personal testimony tonight. But I can get involved in doing something, and if I get right busy working in the morning time, breakfast really isn't that big of a deal. Lunch necessarily isn't that big of a deal. Some of you guys that work with me right now are trying to call my bluff. I know that. But if you really get interested in what you're doing, kind of crunch time, then you can work and you can get through it. But tonight, if I decide that tomorrow I'm going to fast, then immediately I start thinking about all the foods that I haven't eaten in so long. And I'd love to go to that restaurant and love to eat that. And it's just a plague of sorts that kind of begins battling inside of our mind. And it's all because of our society. It's because of the culture that you and I live in. We are so used to having whatever we want, even though we don't need what we so desire. And so there's no wonder that it is that we're going to have to approach this subject of fasting with almost a little apprehension on the subject, because we're so inclined to having everything that we so desire inside of our life. So let's start off tonight by defining what fasting really is. What is it? What does it mean to fast? Well, the primary definition of Christian fasting is that it is a believer's voluntary abstinence from food for spiritual purpose or purposes. It is the believer's voluntary abstinence from food for spiritual purposes. Now I referred to this as a primary definition of Christian fasting. As a primary definition because there is a broader sense of the term where abstinence from other involvements may be deemed as appropriate fast. Okay, so we understand that in a broad general sense, to fast from something just means that you abstain from something. And so there are a lot of things that you could possibly fast or abstain from and still be for a spiritual benefit inside of your life. But the primary usage of the idea or the concept of fasting is to abstain from actual food, and it's to do so on a voluntary basis, meaning that if you get sick with the coronavirus or with the flu or something like that, and you don't eat, you can't count that as fasting because you have 103 fever and you're puking up. There's pulpit manners for you. Everything that you're attempting to digest, you can't call that fasting. Now that helps kickstart some of our diet programs, but it's not necessarily done so with spiritual purposes in mind. We should also understand tonight that there are several types of fast that are mentioned throughout the Scriptures. There are several types of fast. For starters, there is a partial fast. A partial fast. What we mean by that is a person may fast while still eating certain foods. A partial fast just means that there is a limitation placed upon a person's diet. You see this, one biblical example of that is whenever Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the three Hebrew children, go into Babylonian captivity, they are reduced down to a very strict diet. They are abstaining from certain other foods for a trial period there. And so you have a partial fast. Then there is what is known as an absolute fast. An absolute fast is where a person totally abstains from both food and drink. No food, no bread, no water, no nothing at all that is being consumed. And then there is the supernatural fast. The supernatural fast, which is kind of what I feel like I do about 8 hours every night. I wake up so hungry the next morning, right? But that's not. A supernatural fast is a fast that goes beyond the boundaries of normal capability. It's like Moses going up into the mountain and not eating or drinking for the period of 4 days. And we know, medically speaking, that a person can't last much more than 7 days without drinking any fluids, especially in the environment that he possibly would have been in during that period of time. And then what's more than that is Moses comes down and then goes right back up into the mountain for another 40 days. So it's assumed that there were 80 days without any food. That would be a supernatural fast. Then there is what we would call a routine fast. A routine fast. And what we mean by that is that there is a scheduled fast. Israel had one of those on the Day of Atonement. Every year, they were not to eat anything for a certain period of time. So that is a routine or a scheduled fast. Then there's a congregational fast, meaning that the entire assembly fast at the same time. The children of Israel returning from captivity, the southern kingdom of Judah coming back into the land, would hold a fast to mourn and grieve over sin and to seek the Lord that they might be right with Him in their relationship. So there's a congregational fast. We've even done that here together as a body of believers. We've done that periodically through my ministry. I think it's been probably a couple of years since we've actually done that for a certain purpose here congregationally. And we're probably going to try to do that sometime the first of the year, just as we're working through these spiritual disciplines together. I thought that'd be a very good practice for all of us. The most common fast among Christians today would be a normal, private, occasional fast. A normal, private, occasional fast. Meaning, normal, you're abstaining from only food. That would be considered a normal fast. Just abstaining from food, but being able to drink water or some form of liquids. So it's normal in that sense. And then private, meaning that you're doing it by yourself. And you're not doing it with a congregation or with a group of individuals. And then it would be occasionally, meaning that you're only fasting as you see the need arise. That you're not necessarily setting up, every Tuesday of the week or every Thursday or every first whatever of the month or whatever the case is. That would be probably the normal kind of, or the average fast that is participated inside of Christianity today, a normal, private, occasional fast. Now, our text here this evening, Matthew chapter 17, our text this evening is often seen, as far as I'm concerned, to be more confusing than it is enlightening for a lot of folks that approach this particular text. They read through and they see that the disciples were not able to cure a son who's considered to be a lunatic. That's the statement of the year, right? And so Jesus comes back down from the mountain, and he immediately casts the demon out without any struggle. The disciples question Jesus, why could not we cast out the demon from this man's son? Jesus in verse number 20 says, well, it's because of your lack of faith, your lack of unbelief, or not your lack of unbelief, your lack of belief, your unbelief. And Jesus says, verse number 20, for verily I say unto you, if you have faith as this grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall be removed, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Verse number 20 seems to put the whole crux of the matter on the idea of just unbelief, lack of faith, right? And Jesus is saying you couldn't do it because you don't believe in the correct manner. And we saw that again several months ago. He's not talking about the quantity of faith rather than he's talking about the quality of the faith, what that faith should be able to accomplish. And then he comes in verse number 21, he says, howbeit. In other words, that's not it, fellas. Let me add this to it. Howbeit, this particular kind, Christ says, does not come out but by prayer and fasting. So it's not enough to just believe and to pray, Christ says, but there's this coupling together with this concept or the subject of fasting. What in the world is Jesus saying here? Should these disciples had stopped and said, hold on just a minute, we're going to go and give up food for the next 48 hours and we'll come back and we'll try this thing again? I've oftentimes looked at this story with such perplexing questions. Sometimes, well, what does it mean? How could these disciples had been prepared? How could they have been ready for this event? How could they have known prematurely that this was going to happen? And so they prepare themselves by fasting, knowing, just any second now this dad's going to be bringing this lunatic son. He hadn't called in advance. He hadn't set up an appointment. He hadn't scheduled anything. So again, it becomes very, very confusing if we're not careful what Jesus is meaning by his statement of verse number 21. So what exactly does Jesus mean then that this kind of a demon can only come out or be removed by prayer and fasting? How are we to understand fasting in this particular context? Well, let me start by saying this. It's almost perceived by so many inside of Christianity that fasting is some kind of hocus pocus that's kind of added into the mixture of the practice of prayer, and that fasting kind of gives some kind of force, that it manipulates God into making sure whatever I'm asking for is actually brought to fruition. That it's this hocus pocus formula that, okay, I've tried something and I failed, I've asked God and I believed, but that's not enough. And so now to get the Lamborghini, all I have to do is skip 24 hours of eating, right? And I can kind of tack that one in there, and everything should just come to pass just like I've wanted it to be. Well, it's no surprise tonight we don't affirm such a viewpoint of fasting. I believe we'd be wrong to view fasting like some formula, some hocus pocus, if you will, in this passage or from any other passage. I don't think fasting is ever seen like that on the pages of Scripture. Instead, tonight, I believe that we should see fasting as an enhancement to our spiritual performances. Fasting is an enhancement to our spiritual performance. It allows a more attentive focus. Fasting allows a more attentive focus. And I hope that'll make sense for us tonight here by the time we finish up. I was reading just a few days ago, and behind a Christian author, and I was really surprised by what this man had to say concerning fasting. A Christian author stated that fasting has absolutely no benefit to a lost person. And I was really intrigued by his statement because I really strongly disagree with such an assessment. He said in no uncertain terms that fasting has no benefit to a lost person. And I disagree with that. In fact, fasting, I believe, in a general sense, can provide a benefit of enhancement to anyone's life. For instance, let me give to you a couple of examples because some of you may be questioning where I'm coming from tonight. For instance, some people, again, will get so caught up in their work that they'll skip a meal because they're so involved in what they've got going on. They will abstain from eating voluntarily because they're so involved in what they're doing. Well, what happens? Well, their performance has been enhanced in the sense that they have accomplished more than if they had stopped to eat a meal and recover from the sluggishness of a fast-paced society like you and I live in. Or there's the person who will stay up maybe partially through the night or maybe completely through the night because there's a deadline that he has to meet at work, and abstaining from a certain amount of sleep or an entire night's sleep may enhance his performance by allowing such a person to accomplish a certain feat inside of a deadline that has been given. There's the enhancement of the performance. Fasting has also been proven in a medical sense to help cure physical ailments and diseases. In fact, when I was in Bible college, I had to take a course on fasting and I had to read several different books. And one book was written from a strictly scientifically medical assessment of what fasting does. And inside of the medical world, fasting is actually used as a medicine of sorts. It has been known to cure tumors. It has been known to cure cancer. It has been known to cure a variety of different ailments that folks would encounter. Now that almost seems foreign to us because one of the first things that you and I are told whenever we get sick is to make sure that we're eating and drinking because we want to keep things pumping into our body. But the reason why we have to do that is because the medicine that we're putting in our body demands that we put food and drink inside of our body to make sure that we don't get, certain things out of balance. And so it's really medicine that demands for us to do that. But if you were to try to cure yourself tonight of some physical ailment without the advances in modern medical science, and I'm not at all proposing you to do that because if I get sick tonight, I'll drink a half a bottle of NyQuil before I go to bed. And so I'm not at all proposing that necessarily. If that's what you want to do, then that's great. I'm going to help you out tonight, all right? If your insurance is through the roof, here's you a suggestion to try to lower your health costs for 2021. You could try fasting. And the idea here is that if you get sick, you stop putting things into your body as much as possible. And the idea behind it is this. If I'm sick and I'm constantly eating, then the energy and the effort that my body could be assigning to fighting whatever disease was wrong inside of my body is now having to go towards breaking down the food that I've introduced to my system, and it's having to take the nutrients and appropriate them in certain places of my body and break down and all of this kind of stuff. And so if I was to fast in this sense, then my body could take all of that energy and instead of digesting the food that I've introduced to my system, it can take that energy and focus on curing whatever is wrong inside of my body. So by not eating, the body can focus its energy on healing itself rather than digesting the food. So again, there is the enhancement of the performance. The body is able to focus the energy on the need that is at hand. Well, that is exactly what we're talking about here this evening in a spiritual context. Again, by not eating, I'm able to focus more attentively on whatever need there is at hand. All right? Just like my body could be able possibly to heal itself by abstaining from food or whatever the case might be in a more broad general sense, I am being able to focus my attention and my energy towards whatever need there may be at hand currently
inside of my life. Now maybe you're one of those guys that are saying something like what I would think about at this point in time if I heard a guy up here talking about this kind of stuff. Maybe you're thinking, not going to work with me. If I skip a meal, all I'm going to be thinking about is, why am I skipping this meal? Right? You're going to be thinking, why am I so hungry? And there it is. That's exactly right. I decide I'm not going to eat lunch tomorrow. And so when lunchtime rolls around and my stomach starts telling me, hey, guy, you're supposed to be putting something inside of me right now, and I start feeling the hunger pains and start thinking about how hungry I am, like I couldn't stand to skip a couple of meals, then my mind immediately is going to go where next? Oh yeah, I'm not eating, and then why am I not eating? So you see what's happened? My attention, my focus is now placed more on a spiritual need that is at hand than it is on feeding my physical body. Fasting, therefore, is not a practice where we are compelling God to simply do our bidding for us or manipulating or forcing God. If we were to ask God for something outside of His will for our life, fasting is not going to cause God to reconsider and do it anyhow, even though He didn't want to do it in the first place. That is not what fasting is. Fasting focuses our attention more particularly, and at the same time, it displays to heaven in evidential form that we are serious about what we have brought to the Lord in prayer. Arthur Walls, in his book entitled God's Chosen Fast, made this statement on this particular subject. He said, fasting is calculated to bring a note of urgency and importunity into our prayer and to give force to our pleading in the courtroom of heaven. The man who prays with fasting is giving heaven notice that he is truly earnest. Not only so, but he is expressing his earnestness in a divinely appointed way. He is using a means that God has chosen to make His voice to be heard on high. Listen, let's be honest about it tonight. If someone knew that we weren't going to eat our next meal, they would ask us, what's wrong with you? They would assume that something is bothering us and causing us not to eat. Why? Because it becomes kind of a serious subject, very especially for us Westerners. And so the idea laps over into our spiritual pursuit. We're getting heaven's attention. We are showing in evidential form that we are serious about what we are bringing to the Lord, in so much that we are placing more of our focus, more of our attention. Remember what James says, James chapter number 5, that the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. We are going to God in fervency, showing just how earnest we really are. This is exactly what Jesus was saying to His disciples in Matthew 17 and verse number 21. You've got to be more focused. You've got to pay more attention. There's something lacking in your life. And the idea isn't that every obstacle that's just thrown inside of your way, you're just going to be able to say, oh God, get rid of this, and it's just magically going to disappear. God says, you are going to have to couple with this fasting. You're going to have to get focused. You are going to have to center your attention on what is necessary in your life. If you're going to accomplish certain things in your Christian life, you will have to get more focused. And so fasting provides an enhancement to our spiritual lives. It comes alongside of what we are already doing, and it shows that we are focused, that we are giving more attention to it, and that's exactly what we are doing. And so you think about periodically throughout the day, man, I'm hungry, I should eat. Oh no, I can't eat. I'm fasting. Well, why am I fasting? Well, here's what's at hand. And so now I'm going to stop, and instead of eating the Snicker bar, or instead of eating the apple, for those of you that eat those things, instead of doing that, you pray. And you say, God, this is why I'm not eating. This is so important to me. And this is what the need of my life is, or the need of their life is at this point in time. And God, we need your help. It is a means to center our focus on the pressing need at hand. And God,
has hand-delivered this means to us and said, whenever it's this important to you, then fast and get your focus right. And God says himself in red letters in Matthew chapter number 17 here, that's how you accomplish these kinds of things in your Christian endeavors. All right? Let's stand tonight for prayer.